I think in the modern world we want to tear down whatever heroes that we had, but in the United States this was a really important part of everyone's childhood to celebrate Columbus as someone that represented really in many ways what was the best about America.
I wanted to talk about Columbus Day. This is very controversial among some circles. Should Columbus Day be renamed Indigenous Peoples Day?
No, I don't think so. I don't see why there's any reason to cancel someone that fundamentally changed what we perceive to be the modern world. There are some complicated legacies with regard to Columbus, but so many of the things that he accomplished obviously render the world very different than it would have been ordinarily. I think it's somewhat ironic too that so many of what allows people to criticize Columbus are really the very virtues that he brought with him from Western civilization. The natural rights of man, the dignity of man regardless of station. And so I don't think we should cancel him. I think we should celebrate him.
There are those who make the argument that he is a colonizer, that he stole wealth from indigenous people here in the Americas, and that he essentially led to the genocide of vast civilizations.
I think the indigenous people that were here, if any sort of fair or studied approach to the indigenous peoples that were here would tell you that sadly that they were human beings and that they were no strangers to war, to violence, to human servitude. Columbus was a complicated man. He certainly was doing this for wealth. He was doing it for his own social status, but his primary goal was to spread the gospel of Christianity into the New World. And so, as you know, he died in the early 1500s, Columbus. So I think it's rather odd to blame him for so many of some of the things that happened in his wake, when his primary purpose was not to subjugate other people, but to find new worlds for trade, and also, as I said, to spread Christianity. So I think that there is a certain sense in which I think in the modern world we want to tear down whatever heroes that we had, and I don't know whether this is the same in the UK or other places, but in the United States, this was a really important part of everyone's childhood to celebrate Columbus as someone that represented really in many ways what was the best about America. It's a restless people, it's a people that's quite ambitious, that looked for new challenges. So many of his characteristics and traits became part and parcel of what it meant to be an American long before America existed. And so I think we can have a much more, I would say, less infantile approach to separating out this man's legacy from necessarily his achievements. So at least that's the way I see it.
What do you make of this idealization of the so-called indigenous peoples and comparing their civilization to Western civilization? I know that many on the left would say we were the ones who destroyed their fantastic creations, and we basically were these awful colonizers and came with imperialism and imposed our values on them when that wasn't right. So what do you make of this idea that the indigenous people had this fantastic civilization that was destroyed by evil Western colonizers?
I'm certainly not an historian. I'm an Italian American. I was very proud of my heritage, but I also have done a fair amount of reading about the development of the New World. And as I said before, the indigenous peoples here were no strangers to war. They were no strangers to certain practices like human sacrifice that we would find abhorrent and should find abhorrent, or slavery, other forms of violence. This idea that there was some sort of noble savage here and that the West ruined it all, I think just it is not realistic, and it stands in contrast to what we know just about human beings. We're all complicated, we're all flawed, We're all imperfect. But I do think the West and Western civilization has done more to try to soften the edges of that through belief in God, belief in Jesus Christ, than any other society before or since. And so again, I think we're all capable of understanding both. It doesn't have to be entirely making Columbus entirely some sort of anti-hero. We can celebrate what he did, which benefited mankind. There's no two ways about it.
So do you believe that Western civilization, Christianity and so on, are superior to other civilizations?
Again, this is beyond my ken, but I do. I do think so. And as I said before, so many of the principles upon which we can criticize the West, ironically, only exist because the West existed. The ideas of free speech, freedom of religion, freedom of expression, all of those things are part and parcel of what it means to be Western. And that's not something that was particularly common before the advent of Christianity.
It's not just Christopher Columbus that they're trying to cancel. There are other figures in American history, people like Thomas Jefferson, even George Washington. What do you make of these broader trends of attacking American heroes and icons as slave owners and, basically evil white men?
Yeah, again, I think that we have to, again, as educated adults, I think we have to look at everyone in context, and also the context of the times in which they lived. But America is really the home of the first revolution for freedom. And so it's an important country, I believe. It's an important example that was set forth by people who are taking enormous risks, like Thomas Jefferson and the other founding fathers, to their own property, to their own lives, to form a more perfect union in which all men were created equal. That has endured, and that has been spread throughout the world. Unfortunately, it's not as common as one might think, even in 2024. It's still the ability to have your own faith, the ability to express yourself the way you want, is not necessarily universal. It's something that's found in the West. Unfortunately, it's I would say from a security point of view, it also comes with it some risks, because the very freedom that we grant people also gives people the freedom to try to destroy it. So the best way to inoculate ourselves against that, in my opinion, is to celebrate the people, while they may have been imperfect, celebrate their contributions to mankind.
And just finally, to what extent have these ideas spread amongst America's financial institutions? There's this idea of so-called woke capitalism, and I'm sure that many private companies in America, would support Indigenous Peoples Day, would have kind of DEI seminars about this kind of stuff. So to what extent have these ideas gripped America's financial companies?
Well, listen, unfortunately, I think for a lot of the largest financial companies, there's people have gotten swept up in the idea of diversity, equity, and inclusion to the exclusion of what makes America great, what has made it great, what has made it really a beacon for private enterprise. This country that didn't even exist a couple of hundred years ago has gone on to create some of the most fantastic wealth and lifted more people out of poverty globally than any other. And so it's, again, I find it somewhat ironic, but listen, most businessmen are not particularly principled and move where the wind blows them. It's not to say that they're immoral or do immoral things, but I hope and I believe that businesses should go back to just trying to provide great products and services for their customers, instead of trying to focus on virtue signaling rather than real virtue. Providing a good or a service to other people that other people want to consume is a good. It is something that is intrinsically good. And capitalism, in my opinion, as someone who started my own company, I believe very strongly that the basis of capitalism, of starting a business, is to provide something to other people that other people value. So I unfortunately, business people seem to be somewhat ashamed of the fact that by doing that they can also create wealth for themselves, and so they feel that they have to play this game of trying to atone for sins that really don't really apply to them. But that is part of the modern world, unfortunately. But I think everyone would be thrilled. Many people in this country would be thrilled if we just got back to basics, which is just selling beer, selling automobiles, selling televisions, all the things that make America great. Beer, automobiles, and television being first among them. But as opposed to trying to present yourself as something that you're not.
And just very quickly, do you believe those winds are shifting in the other direction? Are they blowing against wokeness and against DEI in these corporate companies?
I think so, Steven, because I think that people are realizing that there's a cost to that. And the cost is that you're alienating a lot of just regular people who just want to buy beer. They don't want to be lectured to. They're free to make up their own minds about the best way to raise their families and to conduct themselves in civilization. And they don't need a corporation with questionable motives telling them how to live their lives. I don't think it's particularly effective. As a matter of fact, it's been counterproductive in certain companies like Budweiser, like Harley Davidson, really iconic American brands are finding that this is not a good way to sell your product. And I think everyone would welcome, and this is both from the left and the right, no one wants to be lectured to. I think, as one of your countrymen said, people in this country have had enough of experts, and I think they just want to be left alone.